The mechanical whirring of the burial device had barely begun when my stepmother decided to dismantle everything I knew about myself. 47 relatives surrounded that October grave, and Vivian chose that precise moment, while my father's casket was still descending, to step forward in her tailored black ensemble and level her finger at me like a prosecutor presenting closing arguments. "Before we let Sterling find peace," she announced, her voice slicing cleanly through the frigid air, "there is something every person here deserves to know about Brooke." The way she spoke my name felt like swallowing something toxic. Before we continue, your like, subscribe, and share help support this channel and motivate us to bring you more amazing stories. Now, let's get back to the story. I had shared 8 years of life with this woman. I had watched her quietly shuffle our household photographs until images of my mother became difficult to locate. I had sat through her polished exclusions, each one dressed up in honeyed smiles. Even so, nothing had prepared me for this. Not here, not above freshly turned soil. This young woman, she continued, her finger still aimed at my chest, has spent 32 years living inside a falsehood. Sterling Caldwell was not her biological father. The shock moved through the crowd in successive waves. My Uncle Theodore's prayer book tumbled into the mud. My cousin Mallory seized my arm. Somewhere behind me, someone exhaled the words, "Oh my God," in a shattered whisper. I stood completely still, unable to draw breath, unable to form a single thought. My father had been gone exactly 72 hours, and the woman he had married was standing above his grave attempting to scrub me from his story entirely. "You're lying." The words came out of me before I fully decided to speak them, and they sounded borrowed, like they belonged to someone steadier than I felt. She produced a folder she had concealed beneath her coat. "Sterling's blood type was O negative. Brooke carries a B positive. Biologically, that combination is an impossibility. I have the documentation right here." Beside her stood Dexter, 6 feet of barely concealed satisfaction packaged inside an expensive suit. "Rough break, sis," he said, drawing the word out like a private joke. "Turns out, you were never really one of us. My mother has already been in contact with attorneys regarding the estate." The ground beneath me felt unreliable. This was the man who had steadied my bicycle seat with patient hands, who had walked beside me on my first morning as a teacher, who had dialed my number without fail every single Sunday evening just to ask about my week. Sterling Caldwell, proprietor of 3 hardware stores throughout the area, had never once introduced me any other way than this. "This is my daughter, Brooke. She's going to be a teacher someday." And now Vivian was telling his family, his friends, his entire world, that none of it had been real. "How dare you?" My Aunt Greta's voice emerged like something breaking. "At his burial, Vivian, is there truly nothing inside you that feels shame?" "I am simply stating facts," Vivian replied, smoothing herself back into that carefully maintained sweetness. "Sterling's true legacy rightfully belongs to his actual bloodline. It belongs to Dexter." That was when Mr. Harwell made his presence known. He had been positioned quietly beneath a large oak at the cemetery's edge, briefcase in hand with the composed stillness of a man who had been anticipating this precise moment. Franklin Harwell had served as my father's attorney and closest confidant for 2 decades. He had attended my high school graduation, my college ceremony, and had even appeared at my very first parent-teacher evening when nerves had nearly overwhelmed me. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his baritone voice settling over the chaos with quiet authority. "Before you proceed any further with this, perhaps we ought to address what Sterling placed in my keeping." The certainty on Vivian's face fractured just slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Harwell." He moved forward with unhurried, deliberate strides. Sterling anticipated this possibility. 6 months before his passing, he came to my office carrying specific instructions and a sealed package. From his briefcase, he withdrew a thick manila envelope covered in my father's unmistakable handwriting. His exact words were, "If Vivian ever attempts to claim that Brooke is not my daughter at any point following my death, you are to read this letter and play this recording immediately. Do it in front of everyone, Franklin. Do not allow her to poison people's thinking behind closed doors." The cemetery fell into a silence so complete, I became aware of traffic moving on a road 2 blocks away. 47 members of my family stood frozen in place. Even the funeral director, posted respectfully beside his vehicle, leaned almost imperceptibly forward. Across the front of the envelope, rendered in my father's careful script, to be opened only under circumstances discussed. And below that, in letters I had to work to read through the burn behind my eyes. My daughter Brooke is my greatest achievement. I would not cry. Even now, even with everything crumbling, I would not give her that. But my father was somehow still present, still reaching across the impossible distance between us to stand in front of me. This is theater, Vivian said, though her voice had shed its confidence. I have medical documentation. Blood type science is not subject to interpretation. Quite right, Mr. Harwell agreed pleasantly. He reached again into his case and retrieved a small digital recorder. Sterling was meticulous by nature. He left both a written statement and his own recorded account. He also, he added, his gaze settling steadily on Vivian, was fully aware of your preparations. He knew about the records you assembled. He knew considerably more than you might expect, which is precisely why he ensured I possessed everything necessary to defend his daughter from what he described as posthumous character assassination. The satisfaction drained from Dexter's expression. He looked at his mother, then at Mr. Harwell, then at me. He's calling your bluff, Vivian said, though her voice was now visibly unsteady. Read it, I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness, as though something larger than myself were lending it support. Let every person standing here hear what my father had to say. Mr. Harwell broke the seal with formal precision, and the sound of it carried across the rows of headstones like something final and necessary. Wait, Vivian said quickly, her complexion now matching the colorless October sky. This doesn't have to happen here. We can handle this somewhere private. You made it public yourself, Aunt Greta said, her voice carrying an edge that could have drawn blood. You opened this door, Vivian. Now we all get to walk through it. Mr. Harwell settled his reading glasses into place and began to give voice to words my father had written 6 months earlier while he was still alive, still laughing, still calling me on Sunday nights, yet somehow already knowing this morning would arrive. Before I tell you what that letter contained, I need to tell you who Sterling Caldwell actually was. He built his first hardware store on a $1,000 loan and a handshake philosophy inherited from his own father. Honest tools and straight answers could solve almost anything. By the time I entered the world, 3 stores carried his name. By the time I was 7 and my mother lost her fight with cancer, those stores had become the architecture of our shared life. Every Saturday, we made the rounds together. He would let me assist with inventory while I was still small enough to lose myself between shelving units, teaching me to count hardware pieces and sort components while weaving in stories about my grandfather. He introduced me to every single employee the same way, without variation, without exception. This is my daughter, Brooke. She's going to be a teacher someday. The pride in his voice made me grow an inch each time I heard it. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means a lot. Now, let's see what my father wrote. When my mother died, it became the 2 of us against everything. 15 years of Sunday dinners and Saturday store visits and phone calls that always ended too soon. He never searched for her replacement. He never pretended such a thing was possible. He simply loved me with greater intensity and made sure I felt it arriving every single day. Then, Vivian appeared. She entered our lives when I was 22, newly launched into my first teaching position, and still figuring out who I was becoming. She was striking in the way that made other women feel somehow insufficient. All polished surfaces and deliberate presentation, dressed in garments that communicated wealth, while she described herself as someone recovering from hardship. She arrived with a teenage son named Dexter, a story involving a difficult divorce, and a stated need for something stable. My father fell completely. After years of dates that concluded with him saying she was lovely but not Angela, he was suddenly bringing this woman to our table and folding her into the life we had built together. I need you to find a way to like her, Brooke, he told me one evening on the back porch. Just the two of us, the way it had always been. Nobody is replacing your mother, I know that. But Vivian makes me feel like myself again, and that boy of hers has had more difficulty than a kid should have to carry. So I tried. I put in the genuine effort. But something consistently failed to align. The way her smile never traveled all the way to her eyes when she looked at me. The quiet reorganization of our photographs until my mother's face required searching for. The offhand mentions of the store's property values, always followed by a small, practiced laugh. After the wedding, the exclusions began, modest at first, each one defensible when examined alone. Brooke, sweetheart, wouldn't you be more comfortable having your meal upstairs while Dexter and I sit with Sterling to go over the business plans? Oh, and did he not mention? We're making changes to the Saturday routine. Dexter needs that bonding time with his new father figure. Each comment was a carefully aimed nudge, each one sliding me a little further from the center of my father's world. Dexter was considerably worse whenever Dad left the room. At 15, he already had several inches on me, carrying his mother's angular features and those calculating eyes that seemed to be forever running numbers. He would make remarks about being the only son in the picture, about preserving the Caldwell name, about how the stores required someone with a firmer hand. Around Dad, however, he transformed entirely into the model stepson, attentive and grateful and eager to please. But my father was not entirely deceived. He simply scheduled our Saturday visits a little earlier. He kept my photographs in the most visible spots in his office. He maintained my childhood bedroom exactly as I had left it, and he never once failed to call on Sunday evening. 3 weeks before everything ended, he summoned me for dinner. Just the two of us, while Vivian had taken Dexter away to tour college campuses. He prepared my mother's pot roast using the recipe she had taught him in the earliest days of their marriage. We ate in the comfortable quiet that only people who have loved each other for a long time can share, before he reached across the table and wrapped both hands around mine. Brooke, there are things I need to say to you, he began. His grip was still firm, his fingers still faintly marked with the oils of his trade despite Vivian's persistent complaints about the evidence his work left behind. The moment hasn't come yet, but I need you to hold on to this. Regardless of anything you hear after I'm gone, you are my daughter. Biology doesn't define family. Love does. And I have loved you from the instant your mother told me she was carrying you. Dad, you're frightening me. I'm simply ensuring my affairs are in order. A man at my stage of life ought to be prepared. His hands tightened around mine. I have made certain you are protected. Mr. Harwell is holding everything on your behalf. Trust him completely if something happens to me. You are a Caldwell Brooke, my daughter, my true heir, and there is not a force in this world capable of altering that. 4 days after that dinner, his heart gave out. The doctors used the word swift, and then the word merciful. They found him at the original store, the one his own father had established decades before him, seated at his desk with a photograph of my mother and me taken at my college graduation cradled in his hands. The funeral was everything a man like him deserved. His employees assembled into an honor guard that stretched the length of the building. The church filled beyond capacity with people whose lives he had quietly and permanently changed. His chosen hymns drifted softly through the air while I stood at the podium and spoke about Saturday morning inventory lessons, about my mother's pot roast recipe, about the Christmas Eve he kept the doors open until midnight because Mrs. Patterson needed a wrench to repair her grandson's bicycle. Sterling Caldwell believed deeply that the right tools could solve almost any problem, I told them, holding the podium to keep myself upright. But the most powerful tool he ever carried was love. Vivian occupied the front row in tailored black, monitoring her own facial expressions with the focus of an actor watching their reflection. Dexter sat at her side, scrolling through his phone. They had both expressed interest in speaking during the service. Somehow, neither had managed to prepare anything. Too consumed by grief, Vivian had explained to the minister, though I had overheard her that very morning on a call discussing property valuations. Now, standing above the grave while the October earth settled around my father, Mr. Harwell cradled the letter in both hands and began. To my beloved daughter, Brooke. I heard Vivian pull a sharp breath through her teeth. What followed was my father translated into written language, unhurried and steady and completely without doubt. The same presence that had steadied the back of my first bicycle, that had checked in every Sunday without exception, that had made pot roast and pressed my hand and promised me I was safe. He confirmed everything I had always understood without needing proof. He had been aware of Vivian's intentions. He had spent 6 months quietly and methodically assembling a shield around me. The blood type argument, while biologically accurate, was a fact he had lived with for 32 years, because my mother had told him the truth in a moment of frightened honesty early in their marriage, and his answer then had been identical to every answer that followed it. You are my daughter. I made that choice. I have never, across a single day of your life, considered you anything other than completely mine. He had also, with the same careful thoroughness he applied to every corner of his life, secured his own legal documentation. A formal acknowledgement of paternity, signed decades prior, built to withstand any challenge under the laws of this state. Witnessed, notarized, and recorded in a courthouse, not tucked into a home desk where Vivian might have located it, but filed permanently and properly in the kind of place where things cannot be quietly made to disappear. The stores, the letter clarified, had been placed inside a trust constructed specifically so that Vivian possessed no grounds to contest them. Those arrangements had been finalized 6 months ago, during the same appointment when he had handed Mr. Harwell the sealed envelope. Vivian was entitled to the house and the financial settlement specified in the prenuptial agreement she had signed before the wedding, the one she appeared to have either forgotten or assumed she could find a way around. Dexter received nothing beyond what my father had already given him during his lifetime. The letter closed simply. Brooke, I suspected you might be standing at my grave when these words reached you. I suspected it because I understand Vivian, and I understand that she would engineer the moment of your greatest vulnerability to strike. So I want my voice to reach you one final time. You are my greatest achievement. Not the stores, not anything the world would call a legacy. You, the teacher. The little girl who learned to balance on 2 wheels in our driveway and never once stopped finding her footing. I am so proud of everything you are. I will always be proud. Take care of the stores. Take care of our people. And never allow anyone to suggest you do not belong because you belong, Brooke. You have always, from the very beginning, belonged with all my love, Dad. The cemetery held its breath. Then Aunt Greta began to cry. Not the restrained, careful kind from earlier, but the deep and relieved kind that emerges when something devastating has been intercepted at the very last moment. Uncle Theodore lifted his prayer book from the mud, straightened his jacket with quiet dignity, and walked directly past Vivian without acknowledgement to come and stand beside me. Family members followed him, one after another, a slow and silent repositioning. Vivian remained where she stood. The folder containing her medical documentation, her carefully sourced evidence, her 6 months of patient construction, dropped to her side like something that had lost all meaning. Her expression had been completely vacated. The performance had finally run out of script. Dexter looked at his mother, then at the ground beneath him. His phone, for once, was entirely still. Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Harwell said quietly, folding the letter with the same deliberate formality he had used to open it. I will be in contact regarding the proceedings. I would strongly recommend securing legal representation. Vivian's mouth opened. Then it closed. She turned from my father's grave without producing another word and walked away, Dexter trailing several steps behind her, his expensive shoes finally collecting mud along the way. I remained long after the last relatives had made their way back to their cars, long after the funeral director had completed his gentle and respectful work, long after the final amber and copper leaves had released themselves from the trees my father used to call God's way of showing off. Mr. Harwell stayed beside me. He spoke about you in every conversation, he said eventually, his voice carrying a warmth now that the formality of the reading had released him. Every single meeting, every phone call, every time I saw him across a room, always Brooke this, Brooke that. The teacher. His greatest achievement. I looked at the headstone. Sterling James Caldwell. beloved father, not stepfather, not legal guardian, not any of the careful, qualifying language the world reaches for when it wants to complicate what love actually is. Father, because that is precisely what he was. What he had chosen to be 32 years ago and continued choosing every morning that followed. He chose me the same way he chose every person he ever hired, every customer he ever stayed past closing for, every stranger he ever helped load something heavy into a truck bed, not out of obligation, not because circumstances required it, but because it was simply the right thing. And because genuine love does not stand at the door waiting for biology to hand it a permission slip. The October air settled cold and clear around me. I reached out and pressed my palm flat against the stone, the way you touch something you need to carry with you always. "I've got you, Dad," I said into the quiet. "I will never let it fall." And I have never meant anything more completely in my life